Hey friends, before I start this video, I would really appreciate it if you'd allow me to lay just a little bit of context. The original idea for this video dates all the way back to about 2023 when I lived in Washington State. It started as a simple idea for a short King of the Hill video for my Patreon, and quickly the idea snowballed into something much bigger, given the topic and how deep it goes. Because it grew so much bigger, I reserved the idea for my main channel, but I kinda kept pushing it off for other projects, being that I mainly cover Nicktoons. Fast forward to around a month or so ago though, as of me recording this, I was featured in a video about King of the Hill from my friend I Was in a Box, with the intent of following his video up with this video. A deep dive into the really complex and spicy love affair between John Redcorn and Nancy Gribble, the wife of Hank's best friend Dale. However, with the recent shocking and senseless murder of John Redcorn's voice actor Jonathan Joss, it's really important to me that I begin this video with a heartfelt dedication to him, and, of course, approach this one with so much admiration for how much of his life that he dedicated to giving such a powerful voice to this truly complex character. Jonathan Joss was a fantastic actor and voice actor. The legacy that he leaves behind in that industry is one that'll truly be remembered. Even bigger than that, though, he was a very strong advocate for LGBTQ+ communities, and with a proud heritage representing the Comanche and White Mountain Apache nations, he played a huge part in uplifting Indigenous voices in many ways. One of which, undeniably of course, was through the roles that he played. In the wake of this horrible tragedy, and the fact that in any context it was investigated as a hate crime, it's really important to me that I take a moment to recognize just how serious this is, and do my part as a creator with an audience to shine some awareness on some causes that are really important to me. In loving memory of Jonathan Joss, I'm going to be including a fundraiser in this video so that I myself, and hopefully anyone else who can, is able to make a donation directly to the Pride Center San Antonio. They're a non-profit organization that helps connect people in need to vital resources in the area of southern Texas where Jonathan Joss grew up and called home into his adulthood. I could say so much about the statistics that I saw on their website, their mission, and the impact that they've been able to make since their inception. But what it really boils down to is the fact that they provide life-changing help for people that face struggles finding help in that particular region of the United States. They help people and their families get access to resources such as a wide variety of mental and physical health support, continued education, addiction support, youth support, veterans and military support, and honestly, that's just scratching the surface on what they offer. It would absolutely mean the world to me if you would consider joining me in making a donation to their cause in loving memory of Jonathan Joss. In the wake of such a heartbreaking tragedy, for me personally, I feel like now more than ever, it's crucial to show support to organizations that make a difference in this world. With that being said, this video is dedicated with so much love to his legacy as an actor and the proud life that he lived as a member of the LGBTQ+ community and a massive advocate for Indigenous voices. Shine bright, my friends. Be the best version of yourself, and happy Pride Month. Thank you so much for your time. Imagine a life where day in and day out, year after year, You park across the street from the same suburban house. You step out of the car and walk up to the front door, letting yourself in with a key, just to be passionately greeted by the love of your life. Your dream partner, beautiful in your eyes, inside and out, in every way imaginable. As you enter the house, sitting in the living room is her husband, obliviously happy that you're here to see his wife. Sitting next to him, though, right before you, is your son, a spitting image of you at that age, the boy that you helped bring into this world. But yet, he calls another man Dad instead of you. A man that blindly trusts you more than anybody else with something very sacred to him, his wife. A man who respects you and considers you a friend. And worst of all, you signed up for this. You inserted yourself into this household. You helped make the bed that allowed a lie to overtake this family. You watch from afar as that man raises a boy who bears nothing to his likeness, bragging about parenting wins and the pride in his legacy. However, he has no idea. He's blissfully unaware, and as a result, naively and tragically happy. But you, on the other hand, you're just there. Every day, in and out of that house silently, like a ghost, speaking in lazily thrown together half-truths and offering massages to excuse your presence. Spending mere awkward minutes at a time with the boy who doesn't know he's biologically your son, under the guise of healing his mother's headaches. On the surface, you convince yourself that this level of involvement is better than nothing, but deep down inside, you know exactly what this is. It's not holistic, herbal healing. It's not fatherhood from a distance. It's betrayal. Not a one-off mistake, but a methodical and repeated affair over more than a decade. But as that betrayal is unfolding, you sit at a distance, watching your son learn to be a man from somebody else, constantly reminded that he doesn't know you and likely never will, in a twist of fate that serves as painful punishment for the lie that you helped create. The thing is, though, John Redcorn didn't just have an affair. He buried a secret that echoes deep in every single scene that he's in. And yet, it isn't that simple. Because if you genuinely step back from the easy moral judgment, you'll see a man who's not just hurting an oblivious friend, but also a prisoner to the life that he's living. King of the Hill, being a cartoon that's grounded so much in realism, knew better than to turn John Redcorn into a simple villain. It doesn't give you the opportunity as a viewer to write him off as a one-trick homewrecker. The show is so much smarter than that. It gives you a man who's aching, a man who's angry, isolated culturally, emotionally, and even spiritually. On top of all of that, though, in his loneliness, he makes one of the deepest, most morally complex decisions that any character would make in this show. On top of all of that, though, in his loneliness, he makes one of the deepest, most morally complex decisions that any character would make in this show. He chooses silence. Ultimately, though, that silence doesn't protect people. It just festers and harbors resentment. Deeper than that, though, is that for the story of John Redcorn, it's not simply just about forbidden love. It's about generational wounds. It's about identity, guilt, cowardice, and the painful acceptance of realizing that you'll always just be on the outside looking in. And that's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna begin a journey. We're gonna look at the affair, the aftermath, and the complicated legacy that John Redcorn represents. More than anything though, we're gonna look at why, despite all of that, he's the most tragic character in King of the Hill. This video isn't about casting judgment. No, it's about unpacking what happens when people make choices in life that they can't take back. It's about love, twisted by shame, about emotional limbo, and it's about a cartoon character whose story might be more real than we've all ever admitted. Before we get down to what really happened in Arlen, Texas, and why this might be one of the most devastating and underrated stories in animated history though, I'd like to take a moment to invite a good friend of mine to lay some context for us. King of the Hill is such a deep show with so many different layers to unpack. As with any onion of a show, it comes along with an amazing community of folks on YouTube who pour so much passion and creativity into breaking it down and analyzing the fine details with an interesting spin. Of course, channels like Johnny Two Cellos, who have touched on the show before, Kitty Monk, Shady Durags, who has a spicy video about John Redcorn, Squirrel Tactics, Reviewed to Death. There's a ton of creators who have shown King of the Hill the kind of love that it deserves here on YouTube. However, today, to introduce my audience to the show for my very first King of the Hill video, I'm excited to welcome my good friend and one of my personal favorite pillars of the King of the Hill YouTube community, I Was in a Box.
Thank you for that, Sean, and hello to all of you watching. If by some chance you've never seen what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest animated shows of all time, King of the Hill, let me give you guys a quick rundown. You might be surprised to learn that calling it the most grounded show in animation wouldn't be a stretch. While other cartoons lean heavily into cartoon logic and just really chaotic antics in general, King of the Hill does the complete opposite. There's no over-the-top sound effects when someone falls, there's no comically exaggerated splats when someone hits the ground, and nothing in the show defies the laws of physics. I guess what I'm trying to say is, the show plays it as about as realistic as an animation can be, and that's just one massive aspect that makes it brilliant. Because it's so grounded, the show can explore real-life stories with nuance. It tackles so many complex topics and family dynamics, yet somehow it still manages to be absolutely hilarious. At the heart of the show is Hank Hill, a propane salesman and deeply devoted Texan who values honor, hard work, and a freshly cut lawn. And then we have Hank's wife, Peggy. She's an overly confident substitute Spanish teacher, who, despite barely being able to speak the language, has managed to win Substitute Teacher of the Year multiple years in a row. And then there's their son, Bobby, who is a soft, creative, sensitive kid who dreams of being a professional comedian. He defies every idea Hank had about how he imagined his son would turn out someday. Bobby's best friends are none other than his neighbors, Joseph and Connie. Hank's friends? Well, that would be Bill, Dale, and Boomhauer, the three philosophers of the alley, who tend to spend more time standing around with beer than actually solving anything. And then there's John Redcorn. This man would be the focal point of one of the most complicated, jaw-dropping storylines in the entire series. This former roadie turned licensed New Age healer is spiritual, stoic, and emotionally complex. Behind his surface, though, is a secret that spans for over a decade. A secret that distorts everything you thought you knew about these characters. A secret buried for more than 10 years by him and Dale's wife, Nancy. This is one of the boldest stories that King of the Hill has ever told. A story that will have you riding an emotional roller coaster, with twists and turns and ups and downs, and with lasting effects that you could never see coming. With that being said, strap in and get ready, because the story of John Redcorn is a wild one. Alright, thank you, Sean, for letting me be a part of your very first King of the Hill video, and I think I speak for everyone when I say, I hope there's many more to come. Now back to you, Sean.
Thanks, my dude. It would mean a ton to me if you guys would check out his channel and subscribe after you finish this video. I Was in a Box is a genuinely nice dude that I'm glad to have made friends with outside of YouTube. He's a good dad and a family man, and we love that around these parts. As far as John Redcorn and Nancy's love affair goes, though, possibly the most devastating part of all is the fact that everyone seems to know. All of Dale's friends know, everyone on the block knows, everyone sees the truth except for Dale. And because Dale doesn't know, no one dares to speak it. Not to him, not to Joseph, not to the community, not even among themselves privately. A majority of them just don't talk about it, burying the lie even deeper. The thing is, though, Dale wouldn't be the only adult who was completely oblivious. Though throughout the first few seasons of the show, we would see major implications that something was going on with John Redcorn, showing up at odd hours, climbing out of windows secretly, and other suspicious clues. It wouldn't be until season 3 when the affair would actually be recognized verbally and would become the focal point of an episode. It would be an episode that would see the whole situation building up like a ticking time bomb, ready to detonate with a truth that would shatter Dale's entire world. We're looking at none other than Peggy's headache. This episode starts out with Peggy grabbing her newspaper while sipping some morning coffee. While she's outside, she sees Dale leaving for work.
Morning, Dale.
Mm-hmm. Hi, John Redcorn.
Dale?
Morning, John Redcorn.
Oh, Peggy. Just dropping off a new healing herb for Nancy to help with her migraines.
John Redcorn heads on into the house, and seconds later we hear music blasting from inside. From there, in the Hill residence, we see the rest of the family beginning their day. Hank and Peggy are just tickled pink by their favorite musings column in the Arlen Bystander. However, their amusement comes to an abrupt end when they learn that the author of this segment is retiring for a big shot gig writing product descriptions for an HVAC company. At that, Luann suggests that her Aunt Peggy could take his place. When Peggy's ego seems to absolutely love that idea, Hank says that she's clever, but she's no Doyle Harkavy.
I'm always making observations all day long.
Really? Go ahead, come up with one.
You mean right now? Okay. All right. Well, let's see. I like milk.
Hey, that's the best so far.
From there, the hours pass as Peggy struggles and struggles to come up with anything even worth a breathy chuckle. At one point, though, Hank ends up coming in happily to check on her, and she just kind of lashes out at him for no reason, saying that he's yelling at her. So she ends up huffing off, saying that she's going to Nancy's house, leaving Hank just kind of confused. When she arrives at Nancy's house, though, she goes to knock on the back door instead of, ringing the doorbell like a normal person. And after just the first knock on the back door, she just kind of helps herself on into Nancy's house, being greeted by nothing but the sound of loud rock music echoing through the halls. She walks right through to the back hallway and up to Nancy's bedroom, letting herself in without even so much as a knock.
Oh, there you are. Hello, John Redcorn.
Oh, yes, we were just, back here.
Oh, phew, I just had to get out of that house. I am trying to do some creative work, and Hank seems to think that he's helping by making me more and more stressed out. It is giving me a whopping headache.
When John Redcorn brings up how headaches can be caused by stress, Peggy gets the idea to schedule a healing session with him. He agrees, and just like that, she walks on out saying that she'll call him to make an appointment. He peels back the curtains and watches as Peggy walks off, questioning her motives.
That was awkward. What kind of game is she playing?
Well, Suge, I don't think she knows about us. Peggy's got such a trusting nature. She always believes the best in people. You know, all of a sudden I feel dirty. I'm gonna take a shower.
I'll join you.
We fast forward to the day of Peggy's headache treatment, and as she walks into John's trailer, you could cut the awkward tension with a butter knife. He's trying his best to stay chill, and she's clearly overthinking everything from the fact that there's carpet in his trailer to the fact that he has a chair which has a place for your head. Before you know it though, his massage techniques have her turned into a pile of goo as he lays her down on the couch so that he can finish billing her insurance. Meanwhile, back in the alley, Hank is telling his friends about Peggy's trouble with her musings submission due to her headaches.
Well, those headaches are good as gone. Peggy went to John Redcorn for a healing.
What?
Don't worry, old John R. will fix her up just like he does for Nancy 3 times a week.
No, Hank, I'm sure Peggy's headache is nowhere near as serious as Nancy's.
Hank insists that Peggy doesn't have the same kind of headaches that Nancy does, after even Boomhauer shows his concern, and next thing you know, Hank is pacing in his house waiting for Peggy to come home. When she walks through the door singing, the look on his face is just one that screams worry. However, his mind is put at ease a bit when she says that as soon as he started massaging, she fell asleep almost immediately. That ease is short-lived though, as she tells him that she has a follow-up appointment next week.
I don't know how some guy rubbing your neck helps your head. I mean, what's the connection?
Ooh, my reporter's instincts tell me someone's a little grumpy without his dinner. I just got my first musing. My husband calls me his better half because I better have dinner on the table when he gets home.
As Peggy goes to write that zinger down, Luann walks in and sees Hank on the couch looking defeated. When he tells her that Peggy went to John Redcorn for a headache treatment, even she's worried that something could have happened, knowing good and well about Nancy and John's affair. So the next day, Hank goes right to John's trailer to confront him. John comes out with a beer for each of them, almost as if he was prepared for this. The two get straight to the point, with John pointing out that Peggy came by for a legitimate reason.
Her head actually hurt.
I know that, but as I recall, that's how it started with Nancy Gribble.
Hank, you are my friend. I promise you, I would never heal your wife in the way that I heal the wives of others.
You better not, because if you lay one unprofessional hand on Peggy, I'm gonna kick your ass.
Hank comes home after threatening John Redcorn to good news from Peggy that she landed the musings column after submitting some of her one-liners. He's excited for her, but even more excited at his assumption that this means her headaches are over. Unfortunately for him though, she says now she's going to be facing deadlines and all sorts of other stress, so she's going to need to schedule a weekly night with him. He tries to dismiss that idea, beginning to massage her himself, saying that he can do the job, but he just ends up doing more harm than good.
What is it that you have against John Redcorn?
Don't make me say it. You know what he does to his clients?
You think he's overcharging me?
For God's sakes, Peggy, come on. It's taken him 13 years to cure Nancy's headache.
So you're saying What are you saying? You're calling him a quack?
Hank says that it's actually quite the opposite. His methods are a little too effective. He looks outside and points out Nancy, Joseph, and John Redcorn, and slowly but surely the gears start turning and Peggy starts connecting the dots, leaving her absolutely shocked 13 years later than everybody else.
How could you not tell me what was going on in my own side yard?
I thought you knew. How could you not know? I mean, look at Joseph. Where do you think he came from?
Nancy told me Dale had a Jamaican grandmother.
At that, it hits Peggy like a ton of bricks. The fact that Dale has been raising John Redcorn's biological son all this time. She asks Hank if Dale knows, and he says that Dale is just as slow as she is. In a sweet and trusting kind of way. In a fit of frustrated enlightenment at this news, Peggy heads right outside to confront Nancy, who's just kind of minding her own business.
Who told you?
I wouldn't have to tell me. How stupid do you think I am? You've been cheating for 12 years. Nancy, how could you?
I have my reasons.
Yes, and I've seen those reasons packed into his Sergio Valente jeans. And you, Dale Gribble is your friend. How could you be a look the other wayer?
Hank shockingly enough, tells Peggy that she's only so up in arms because it's still so new for her. He says if she lives with it for a while, she'll start to get used to it. Sadly, though, it isn't that easy for her as she sees everything different from that day forward. We see that same exact scene from the start replay with Dale leaving for work and walking right past John Redcorn, who lets himself in with his own key.
Well, well, well. John Redcorn.
Oh, Peggy, Nancy's headache's very severe this morning. Must be the pollen.
Well, well, well.
Well,
John Redcorn.
Peggy Hill.
From there, we see Hank in front of Bill's house with him and Boomhauer as he brings up Nancy and John Redcorn's affair for the very first time with them, making sure to do it in a place where Dale won't find them. Sadly, though, the conversation doesn't really go anywhere as Bill and Boomhauer shut the conversation down completely. And while that's happening, Peggy just continues to spiral as she goes to Min's house because she just has to tell somebody about the news that she learned.
It's about Nancy. She's having an affair.
Oh, my God. She's cheating on John Redcorn?
You know about them?
Oh, not at first. It took me about an hour. But I'm naive and trusting person. Peggy here, you not know?
Min laughs hysterically at Peggy and runs off to go email Con about it, and just like that, we fast forward to a while later where Peggy is back at home when the doorbell rings. She's surprised to find none other than Dale, who's just coming to see if Hank's around. But Peggy awkwardly lays it on a little too heavy with the friendliness, talking about how amazing of a man he is, how lucky that Nancy is, and inviting him in for some pie.
I should go.
Hey, Dale, what's going on?
Oh, not much. Peggy Hill wants to leave Hank and run away with me.
I don't believe it. Well, they have a fairy book marriage.
From there, things just get harder and harder for Peggy, as we cut to her and Hank at a baseball game. He tells her that being around the Gribbles after you learn their secret is awkward and hard for the first few years, but you get used to it eventually. He tells her to just try and think about literally anything else.
Oh, man, look at that John Redcorn. He sure can swing. Whoa!
Good eye.
Are you kidding? This guy never strikes out. Ain't that right, Nancy?
Oh, Bob.
Peggy ends up being worked up into a pretty much full-blown panic attack as she's trying to hold back as she hears Dale cheering about John Redcorn scoring, and ultimately she has to run away to the parking lot to get some fresh air and space. Hank comes to check on her and she says that she just can't live this lie anymore.
Well, it takes two to talk about it, and everyone else already knows and isn't interested.
No, not everybody knows, Hank. I can think of one person who doesn't. The one person who really should.
Way to go, Big Bad John.
Thankfully, though, Hank is able to talk Peggy down and convince her not to just walk right up to Dale and tell him that his wife's cheating on him. Instead, she decides to pour that energy into her musings as much as she can. While she does that, things reach the ultimate level of complex as Dale comes to Hank in his garage while he's working to talk to him. Hank tries his best to ignore the conversation, but Dale stops him dead in his tracks, saying that this is really important.
Your wife loves me and wants us to run off together. I've not yet been able to ascertain where.
Dale.
No problemo on this end. I don't even find her attractive.
Of course you do, and I appreciate the lie, but Peggy's just being nice to you. But you're a good friend for wanting to tell me.
Hank tries to ask Dale if the roles were reversed, would he want Hank to tell him, but Dale instantly brushes it off, saying that would never happen because Nancy is committed and likes her men frail and pale. The next day, we see the Arlen bystander hot off the press with a new musings column from Peggy talking about letting sleeping dogs lie, specifically saying that they all know a woman who's lying to her husband, and every time they look the other way, they add to that lie. as the article circulates around town, we see that sense of guilt kind of building among the residents. Ultimately, things come to arrears when Peggy approaches Dale's house looking for him, dead set on telling him the truth. Nancy stops her, saying that she loves Dale in a lights-on sort of way, but Peggy dismisses her, saying that either Nancy tells Dale or she does. Of course, after 13 years, Nancy isn't gonna go spill the beans now, which leaves Peggy heading straight for Dale.
Nancy and John Redcorn are...
Hey, Dad!
Just a sec, Peggy. Yes, son?
Me and Bobby are bored. What do we do?
Peggy ends up standing by and watching as Dale suggests that Joseph and Bobby go rent a movie, pulling out his wallet and giving his son the very last bit of money that he had in a really sweet and touching moment that lights up Joseph's face with the kind of joy that a kid can only feel from the love of a parent. As Joseph runs off, happy as can be, Dale turns around to get back to hearing the thing that he doesn't know. Of course, at that moment though, the nuances and intricacies of this entire situation blindside Peggy and leave her speechless. She ends up coming up with a random lie about Vikings being the first visitors to the moon, which, of course, Dale already knew.
Peggy.
Huh?
You've got a good husband there. He doesn't have the best body on the alley, but he's got a good head on his shoulders.
Yeah, I know.
As the episode comes to an end, Hank asks Peggy how Dale took the news, and she says that she just couldn't bring herself to tell him. At that, they agree that there are just some things that are better left unsaid.
You know, Hank, I
know, and Peggy...
I got you.
All right, then.
Great. Pepperoni it is.
Now, this episode is just bursting with so much subtle emotional weight, especially when we step back and take it into consideration as a piece of the larger narrative surrounding Nancy, John Redcorn, Dale, and Joseph. This one is also ripe with a ton of character insight on a lot of different levels. One of the first things that I need to touch on, though, is how mixed I am on that ending. Seeing Peggy come to the conclusion that she did and make the decision to approach Dale with the truth, just for her to see the bond that he has with his son and choose not to reveal Nancy's secret to him out of fear of how much it could potentially destroy their family. It was just such a tough pill to swallow because, in all reality, the show stresses the seriousness of how situations like this really aren't clean-cut ever. Especially when there's a child involved and everyone has let it get to the point where life just keeps moving on as they bury their heads in the sand, avoiding the cold, sad truth. Almost tougher than that, though, was what happened between Hank and Peggy at the end of it all. They just share an unexplained moment of agreement as they go on about their day, thankful that their lives aren't built on a lie. There's a lot to be said further about these actions and what led to them, but on the surface, this ending scene between Hank and Peggy really just is so real. After seeing them both battle with whether or not they should tell Dale the truth and ultimately both separately deciding that leaving him in the dark is for the best at this point, this right here is a moment at the end of them kind of sharing in the same kind of mental isolation in a sense. They're both the only people around here who for even a moment thought about telling the truth. But at the end of it all, there isn't really a resolution. There's no truth revealed. We all just keep going on hiding the secret. Because again, in real life, there oftentimes isn't a neat conclusion. Or, like we saw in this episode, the neat conclusion isn't always the most ethical one. Circling back to the beginning of this episode though, I definitely have to bring up how in the morning when Dale leaves for work, Peggy happily greets him and he barely looks up in return and just kind of makes a noise at her, not even really responding to her like she's a person worthy of his time. However, seconds later, when he walks by John Redcorn, he gets a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed good morning from Dale. That right there speaks volumes about how much respect that Dale has for John Redcorn. He genuinely likes the guy and appreciates having him around. In Dale's mind, John is doing him a favor. He's helping his wife with her chronic migraines, all the while Dale can rest assured that she's safe at home with a strong man protecting her while he himself is at work, completely unaware that the dude is plowing his wife, and has been for ages. Meanwhile, Peggy, well, Dale giving her a lackluster response that morning could be A, an odd act out of respect for Hank in kind of a toxic way, or B, not a lot of people really like Peggy. Speaking of her though, I do appreciate how this episode took the time to capitalize on and emphasize just how naive that Peggy is, and the fact that not only does pretty much every single person in the neighborhood know, but John and Nancy even operate under the assumption that everybody knows. Like, at that one point where Peggy just helps herself to Nancy's bedroom unannounced when she leaves, he even points out to Nancy how he thought Peggy was playing some sort of game, not realizing that she doesn't know what's happening literally right in front of her. On top of that though, later on in the episode when Hank comes to confront and threaten John Redcorn, they don't even really shy away from the topic of his affair with Nancy. He's really nonchalant about it, almost as if he doesn't see the blatant hypocrisy in what he's doing. Also, not really considering that he's wronging Hank's best friend along the way. Like, John Redcorn says he wouldn't sleep with Hank's wife because Hank is his friend, but I mean, how much of a friend is Hank to John Redcorn at this point? What has Hank ever really done for him by this point in the series? Of course, this comes with the implication that John Redcorn doesn't see Dale as a friend, which is pretty sad considering that Dale genuinely likes and trusts him. Dale treats him way kinder and with way more respect than Hank does, in my opinion. More than anything, this adds so much to the tragedy that is Dale's blissful ignorance. This one doesn't really focus on him, but his presence kind of lingers around in the back of your mind throughout the entire episode, knowing that at the end of it all, he's the only person really being wronged here. He's the one who's been lied to for over a decade. It really boils down to one simple aspect. At this point, is Dale's ignorance protecting him, or is it a violation of his autonomy? Now, while we're covering the aspects of these characters that we saw in this episode, we certainly have to talk more about Peggy and how she's so stubborn that she won't even admit that Hank had to spell everything out for her. When we reach the point where Peggy confronts Nancy, calling her out for cheating on Dale all this time, Nancy immediately asks who told her. But of course, she tells Nancy that she figured it out on her own. This, in the moment, gave me such a good chuckle because, to be honest, you know as well as I do that Nancy knows that definitely cannot be the case. If Peggy was going to figure the truth out on her own, she would have done it sometime probably within the last decade. The fact that she's so incredibly furious about it now, plain as day, tells everybody around her that she just found out. Leave it to Peggy, though, to have too much pride to admit when she was late to the party, yet completely lack the ability to hide the emotions of somebody who was clearly late to the party. In the direction of Nancy, though, this one showed a lot of her true colors that are certainly going to come out, quite literally actually, even more a lot later in this series. However, in this particular episode, it really was shocking to see how much she downplays the seriousness of her affair. Like, she's got this man thinking that it's his family's strong Jamaican genes coming through in a son that doesn't even have a similar facial structure to him or bear any resemblance to him, really. Yet, when confronted by it, seemingly by the first person to even step up and have a problem with it, she doesn't even admit that she knows it's wrong, that she's hurting Dale, or anything like that. She doesn't even really attempt to stop Peggy by bringing up how much it would hurt Joseph or Dale. She just kind of brings up how she doesn't like Dale in the way that she likes John Redcorn, as if that's supposed to absolve her of anything she's done here. As if that'll just make Peggy Hill, of all people, just stop and say, "Oh, that makes sense. He deserves to be lied to because you don't like him like that." It's the lackluster justification mechanisms for me, man. All in all, though, it's even a subtle betrayal towards Peggy in a sense as a friend, especially knowing good and well how much Peggy values honesty and morality. At the minimum, Nancy is definitely taking Peggy's trust and loyalty as a friend for granted by being so dismissive of all of this. Furthermore, it is really interesting to keep in mind that we do know that Nancy does have some internalized guilt over this affair. We actually saw it creep through for just a second when Peggy leaves the room after walking in on Nancy and John Redcorn, and she says that she feels dirty and that she's gonna go take a shower. Sadly though, the amount of shame that she feels for lying to the man that she swore vows to isn't enough to stop her from not only sleeping with John Redcorn, but also kind of embracing him to have sort of a skewed, messed up proto-family with her and Joseph. Specifically, I bring that up because of this moment right here, where John Redcorn's just hammering this fence and Nancy is standing behind him, admiring him, with her and Dale's son under her wing. It's kind of a tough one, where John Redcorn is already living this weird duality of being the other man and knowing that he's actually Joseph's father. It feels like Nancy is doing her best to get him some time with his son, all the while refusing to tell neither Joseph nor Dale about the reason why she does that. The biggest thing that bothers me about this episode is how messed up it is that Hank and his friends refuse to even talk about Dale's wife's affair, let alone do anything to stop it. Bill full-blown puts on the most fake robotic voice ever, spouting out his programmed and pre-planned spiel about how he's shocked and how Nancy and Dale have a fair book marriage. Meanwhile, Boomhauer full-blown talks about how they shouldn't pry into family secrets and how everybody has skeletons in their closet. To be honest, on one hand, I'm really surprised that it took this long for them to talk about it. You can tell plain as day that this is just Hank saying what they've all been holding back for so many years now. But on the other hand, I'm even more surprised that Hank, of all people, just stood by and never told Dale about what's happening right under his nose. Much like Peggy, Hank is a person who truly prioritizes justice and integrity. He knows right from wrong, and he knows that what's happening is wrong. Yet he actively chooses not to stop it, and has continued to make that choice for 13 years by this point. I mean, at minimum, a lot of other friend groups would have maybe sat the guy sleeping with their bud's wife down and told him that if he doesn't stop, he's going to regret it. But Hank, the proud Texan, approaches with a very uncharacteristic, hands-off, let's pretend this isn't happening approach. Hank doesn't have a problem with it until it's his wife that's at stake. Which, let's just be honest, John Redcorn definitely isn't interested in sleeping with Peggy of all people. But still, this is a pretty symbolic point on a societal level. It's a very large caricature of people who live life by the rule of, as long as it isn't happening to me directly and personally, I'll just turn a blind eye to it. Even further than that though, this one is very symbolic of the delicate facade of suburbia. all of the pieces fall right into place here. Peggy's hesitancy to tell Dale the truth in the end, Nancy's comfort in lying and keeping this affair going, Min, a couple doors down, who says she took an hour to figure it out after moving here because she's so naive and trusting. All of these things paint such a detailed picture of how, in suburban life, appearances are everything. In a town like Arlen, where reputations are tightly guarded and personal issues are considered inappropriate conversation topics, secrets like this one just kind of fester. When people like Hank try to bring up if this is okay, and people like Bill respond by plugging their ears and pretending they don't hear a thing, it just perpetuates the cycle of turning a blind eye in the name of keeping up appearances. And that right there is a pretty dangerous norm that a lot of people experience in real life every day. At the end of it all, though, Peggy didn't blow up the affair, demand answers, and expose the truth. Her confrontation, to be honest, was really anticlimactic. At the end of it all, she just swallowed the truth, just like every other person in Dale's life does. With that silence, the affair just continues business as usual. However, that wouldn't last forever, as this would kind of serve as the tipping point for a massive change. Not on the surface, as the daytime visits under the guise of New Age healing, while Dale continued living in oblivious and cheerful ignorance, would continue. However, under the surface, things were beginning to shift and crack. Not because someone spoke up, but because the true weight of everything would really start to be felt by both Nancy and John. And it would all reach arrears in an episode that nearly no one saw coming. Next up, we're diving into the Season 4 episode, Nancy Boys. As this one starts out, we see Hank doing a random inspection of a restaurant's propane storage tank when he stumbles upon a leaky pigtail running inside in a panic like it's a life or death situation. He ends up finding one lone employee, none other than the owner, yelling for help from inside the walk-in fridge.
Thank you, Hank. You saved my life.
A leaky pigtail's really more of a waste issue than a safety issue.
I've been trapped in that dang freezer since 2 in the morning. I dropped a jar of ragu and the door slammed shut while I was mopping it up. If it weren't for you, I'd be dead.
The owner of the restaurant tells Hank that he can stop by this weekend and he'll give him dinner for 4 on the house as a thank you. Hank goes home and he tells Peggy all about his heroic feat, and when she asks who they should invite to the restaurant, he says that he was planning on taking Bill, Dale, and Boomhauer. Peggy points out, though, that the restaurant That's Amore is the most romantic spot in the whole county, insisting that he take her and another couple for a nice, intimate dinner together. Later on, when the news of Hank's oblivious life-saving feat and the reward that came with it hits the alley, the guys are all hyped, assuming that they get to go with Hank. However, when he tells them Peggy's plan, the hype immediately turns to disappointment.
Wait a minute. I have a wife. We're a couple. I get a free meal. Ha ha.
Who is it?
Dale Gribble.
After a few moments, Nancy tells Dale to come in, and he tells her the good news that Hank and Peggy invited them to dinner on Saturday. She passes up on the offer, though, saying that Saturday is one of her weekly John Redcorn nights. John, though, shocks her with his response, saying that she should actually go. Nancy immediately gets offended, wondering what she did to upset him, but he simply responds saying that he's been healing her 3 to 5 nights a week for years now, and that he could use an extra night off. She pushes further, however, thinking that there's more to it than that.
I love treating you for migraines.
Then what is it?
It's nothing.
It's not nothing.
It's just, damn it, can I take a night off?
Do whatever you want. I don't care.
Great. I'll tell him we're on.
After that, we see Peggy picking out her outfit when Hank comes to tell her the news about Dale and Nancy joining them for their night out. Peggy, however, immediately ends up frustrated, saying that Dale and Nancy aren't even a real couple. Then we get a pretty shocking revelation about their relationship.
Did you know she only sleeps with him on his birthday and Christmas? That's why she gets so depressed around the holidays.
From there, we cut to the night of their date as both couples are arriving. As Hank and Peggy sit down, Dale pulls out Nancy's chair for her, but instead she just walks over to the payphone to call John Redcorn, leaving him a voicemail as he sits at home, calmly reading a book in peace and listening to her message in real time. Feeling saddened, Nancy goes to sit at the bar, and eventually, Dale approaches her, laying the flirting on extra heavy, and next thing you know, the two end up slow dancing together. Getting closer and closer, relearning one another again. Nancy is shocked to learn that Dale is now the president of the gun club, and even more shocked to hear that he watches the weather every single day, just so he can see her.
I sorta have a crush on the weather gal.
Oh, I forgot you have brown eyes. They are so cute and close together.
Look at those two. They're so happy, almost makes you forget their last 14 years.
At the end of it all, the Gribbles end up going home, and within seconds of walking through the door, Dale says goodnight to her and heads down to his basement, assuming that she wants her space as usual. However, he's taken back like a deer in headlights when she comes up from behind him and ambushes him with a kiss, dragging him back to the bedroom for a spicy night together. The next morning, as the sun comes up and the birds are chirping, Nancy wakes up feeling an unfamiliar body up against hers.
Oh my God.
As the morning continues, Dale starts bragging about his performance last night. However, Nancy says she doesn't really remember because she was pretty drunk. As her husband leaves for work, still smitten and thinking things are great between them, she gets up, ripping the sheets off her bed to clean the shame away. Later on, she's hanging them outside to dry as Peggy comes up to greet her, clearly noticing that she's deeply upset about something.
I slept with Dale.
Oh my God, we forgot his birthday.
Oh, what if John Redcorn finds out? 14 years we've been together and I'd throw it all away for one night of reckless passion.
Nancy?
Peggy starts pitching monogamy to Nancy, saying that this is her chance to leave her lie behind. However, Nancy says that though monogamy works for her and Hank, it just doesn't work for her, Dale, and John Redcorn. Later on, Dale returns from work, happy to see her, but she immediately says that John Redcorn is coming over, asking Dale when he's leaving for the gun club. This gets his gears turning, but sadly not the ones that solve the correct problem.
Every time I leave, you call John Redcorn. I know what's going on here. Your headaches are a desperate bid for my attentions.
Dale starts feeling incredibly guilty, saying that he's been pawning her off on a healer so that he can have his Dale time, not considering how much it was destroying her. However, she starts telling him not to blame himself, saying that in some ways it's her fault too.
I don't deserve you.
Of course you do. You are a sensitive, trusting, sweet, trusting man, and I don't deserve you.
After a little more compliments and flirting with his wife, though, Nancy ends up kissing him again, and next thing you know, the two are caught up in the throes of passion.
Someone just had sex with his wife.
Dang, man, I tell you, little old Hank, man, you don't know grabbing a little old afternoon like that, man.
What? I didn't do...
Me, it was me.
You? And Nancy, are you sure?
As Dale brags to his friends about how amazing his relationship with Nancy has been since that dinner, she sits at the table in the house, holding the phone, smiling at the thought of him, yet broken at the thought of making one of the hardest decisions that she has ever had to make. She dials John Redcorn, and when he answers, she says that she needs to cancel her appointment for tonight because she has a headache.
So, just take an aspirin.
Here's the thing. I can't see you anymore.
Nancy, please.
I'm sorry, John Redcorn.
Nancy hangs up and she heads out to the alley, making out with Dale right in front of everybody, leaving them all dumbfounded that he was actually telling the truth. From there, though, their relationship blossoms like they're falling in love for the first time all over again. They skate together at the roller rink, giddy as a couple of preteens, and at the end of it all, they end up cuddling, with Nancy finally happy as can be for once, seemingly content with the choice that she made.
What the hell?
Where are my smokes?
I think they're in the shower caddy.
What was he doing in your bed? Tell me he had a nightmare.
I didn't mean to hurt you.
Just then, Dale comes up from behind and smashes a lamp over John Redcorn's head, mistaking him for a home intruder. He ends up knocked out on the floor, and when Dale realizes he just assaulted Nancy's healer, he starts to panic, feeling awful for his cat-like reflexes. He asks why John is in their bedroom in the middle of the night, and Nancy covers his tracks, saying it was to drop off an insurance form. But when John comes to, he just ends up hopping out the window and speeding off, hurt more so emotionally than physically. The next day, Nancy ends up on the phone with him, begging him to come back and fix things with her.
It's just seeing you like that, passed out on the floor, so vulnerable, like a sexy wounded bear. We've been through too much together to end it like this. I want you back.
I'm 36 years old. I don't need this crap.
Nancy is left heartbroken and crying her eyes out. Dale offers to go over and apologize for what he did, but Nancy says that it would just be best for them to let it go. Dale refuses, though, heading right to John Redcorn's trailer, deciding to own up to what he's done. At first, John is extremely angry and tries to close the door in Dale's face, but Dale just kind of follows him inside, wanting to help him feel better however he can.
How about you hit me on the head and we call it even? This'll work. Shit.
Oh, hitting you won't change anything. I'll still be living in a trailer, no wife, no land. You know, over half of Ireland used to belong to my people.
This right here would be the first moment where we really see John Redcorn's pain start to shine through, as he admits how much of a struggle that his life has been. He tells Dale that he tried to file a lawsuit with the Bureau of Indian Affairs a decade ago. However, they refused to return the land. At that, Dale starts to explain how John could easily use the Freedom of Information Act to request federal agency records and information regarding his case.
Would you mind?
Bringing down the federal government? Not at all.
Over the next few days, Dale pushes himself really hard to help John Redcorn write letters and pursue the cause of getting his tribe's land returned, and every night when he gets home, he comes up with lies to tell Nancy so that she doesn't know he's been spending time with John.
You are a good man. All this effort on behalf of my struggle, and you're not even a Native American.
Isn't it time we put aside our differences? On behalf of the white man, I would like to formally apologize for everything my people have done to your people.
And I would like to apologize for everything I've done to you.
At one point, though, Dale's even poured so much energy into this that he's worked himself into a headache, giving John Redcorn a chance to use his healing on him a little bit. However, as Dale lies on the healing table finishing up a letter, John's doorbell rings, and he's shocked to see Nancy standing there. She pleads with him, saying that she had it all and threw half of it away, holding him in her arms, begging for him back, as he tries to push her off, knowing that her husband is right behind him in the trailer. When the two see each other, though, they both lie to one another, each coming up with reasons why they got headaches and had to come see John Redcorn. At the revelation that her headaches are back, though, Dale realizes that he missed a date with her that they had planned, and that must be what caused her headaches to come back. At that, he starts to feel guilty again, saying that Nancy and him had 15 years of healing history, and he threw it all away in one swift swing of a lamp. And that's the point where he reveals to Nancy that he actually came here for her, saying that he was just trying to put her and John Redcorn back together.
What do you say, John Redcorn? Will you heal my wife? Please?
No. I'm sorry, but no.
You bastard!
John tells Dale that he's become a true friend to him and that it wouldn't be right for him to continue treating his wife. And at that, he tells Dale that he's a good man and that he loves Nancy, which is the most important part because healing comes from the heart.
I'm sorry. It's just...
Goodbye, Nancy.
Goodbye, John Redcorn.
I was getting a weird vibe in there. You think he's gay?
So that was a lot. This episode is just bursting at the seams with emotional baggage and so many layers of pain mixed with comedic awkwardness. Under that, though, are a ton of subtle and easily overlooked undertones. Before I get into those, however, there's something truly special about this one that I need to bring up. Something that really could be applied to nearly every episode of these early seasons that many other cartoons just couldn't capture regardless of their time period. And that would be the beauty in just how heavily that this cartoon is rooted in the era that it came out. Like, at this point, there's no cell phones, there's no MySpace like we saw in later seasons. In this one, it's payphones. It's answering machines that are a separate device from the phone and play messages out loud so you can hear who's calling to answer it mid-message if you want. And it's Dale sparking a cigarette at the table in the restaurant with a candle. For me, personally, on top of the physics and story being rooted in reality, the fact that each season is so influenced by the time period that it came out is so interesting. Furthermore, the way that time would pass in this show was very intriguing as well. Of course, we know time is passing as we would see Bobby, Connie, and especially Joseph growing over the series, and as it pertains to these episodes, in the first one, Peggy's headache, it was acknowledged that this relationship was going on for 13 years, then in this one, it had been going on for 14 years. That would confirm for us that a year had passed between these two seasons. It's odd because, in a way, though we know the characters are in fact aging, it almost feels like the world is growing up around them faster than they are. Like, early on, we see Bobby playing a Game Boy, listening to boy bands, and collecting troll dolls, which really just emphasizes how rooted in the 90s we were at that point. But, like, fast forward a handful of seasons and we would see Hank playing his own version of Grand Theft Auto and running a Strickland Propane MySpace page. If we really take the passage of time seriously, which, I mean, if there was ever a show to take seriously and overanalyze, it would be King of the Hill, one rooted so deep in reality. It's odd to realize that things almost don't add up as far as the timeline goes. Like in 1997, Hank forced Bobby to smoke a carton of cigarettes because he caught him smoking. Then in 2007, 10 years later, Bobby ends up getting picked to be a cheerleader for the Powder Puff football game, and by all means, this kid doesn't look 10 years older at all. Of course, that implies to us that though time is passing, they're a little bit fast and loose with it. However, when we keep in mind how jarring it is to think about someone smoking in a public restaurant nowadays, it's pretty interesting to take in how much this show dates itself in a really charming, take me back to the 90s kind of way. With that being said, it does make me curious about the new King of the Hill that's coming out in like a little over than a month from now. Looking at the promotional art, it appears like they're leaning heavily into not only the aging of the characters, which has all of us mesmerized, but also the aging of the world to catch us up with 2025, which is something that I'm very curious to see. However, it would be remiss of me to not highlight that the OG era really does have such a special charm that they're never going to be able to go back to. Sure, they can flashback all they want, but it'll never be this, and that's okay. So, in the last one, we touched on how Nancy and John Redcorn behave as if everybody knows about their secret, right? They don't really do much to cover their tracks at this point, and now this one showed us that it's gone so far that they don't even really put much effort into trying to keep the charade up around Dale. To be honest, it was pretty heartbreaking to see him just sit there idly as Nancy and John have a conversation about their relationship blatantly in front of him multiple times in this episode, none the wiser that they aren't talking about healing migraines, they're talking about their love. To be honest, it's a blatant disrespect towards Dale on behalf of both Nancy and John Redcorn. The audacity of having this conversation directly in front of Dale is just astounding. But what's even more atrocious than their minimal effort to cover the content of their dispute is how neither of them do anything whatsoever to mask their tone. Like, nobody talks to their massage therapist or their doctor like that. They'll tack on 4 migraines to literally every sentence, acting like that removes the emotional tensity of everything that they just said and mask the fact that anyone with half a brain could put together that they're in love. More defeating than that, though, is the fact that their half attempt at fooling Dale actually works. That simple "for migraines" at the end of each sentence is enough to convince Dale that everything is kosher and that he isn't blatantly being cheated on in his own bed and being forced out of it. Like, he even begs John Redcorn at the end to come back and heal his wife, and that right there, oh man, knowing that all of this is happening under his nose, in his house, and it goes as deep as affecting his family tree, and he has no idea, it just puts such a deep pit in your stomach, feeling the secondhand dread for the entirety of the situation. One other thing about this episode that kind of bothered me a bit, though, was Peggy talking about how Nancy only sleeps with Dale around the holidays, and that's why she's so depressed at that time of year. Honestly, this makes me feel so many feelings. First of all, though, I have to kind of admit that those feelings are a little hard to sort through because, in all reality, they're essentially based on the context of Peggy getting that information. Like, did Nancy confide in her and they had a conversation about this within the year since Peggy found out about the truth? Or did Peggy put this together herself, making assumptions about Nancy? Of course, we have to consider their neighborhood is full of gossip, so maybe she heard it from Min, who herself could have made that assumption, or heard it from Nancy. Regardless of where that info came from, though, I can't help but wonder how true it is. Not the sleeping with Dale only on his birthday or Christmas part, that I definitely believe without any proof or validation. However, I'm more wondering about the depression that Peggy brought up. Now, if Nancy told someone that directly, then yeah, I get it, and to be honest, that would be really sad. Especially keeping in mind how happy Dale seemed to have made her in this episode. However, on the other hand, it would be pretty awful if Peggy just connected those dots on her own and came to the conclusion that what is actually maybe seasonal depression or something along those lines is just a deep disdain for having to be physical with her husband, which culminated in depression. Of course, still focusing on the plain as day facts though, how absolutely deplorable is this entire situation? The fact that at the start, and I guess in general, Nancy sees herself sleeping with her own husband as cheating on John Redcorn. She did that, and her words, if I recall correctly, were 14 years we've been together and I throw it all away for one night of reckless passion. Like, she feels as if she's having an affair with Dale behind John Redcorn's back. Yet, she doesn't see her entire relationship with John Redcorn as cheating on Dale. It's honestly just such a nasty blow. Nancy's morals are truly questionable. I mean, it'd be one thing if Dale was, into this and consented to it. Of course, who would I be to judge in that scenario? People participate in polyamorous relationships all the time, and that's totally their choice to make, of course. However, the key point is making that choice. Knowing what you're signing up for and agreeing to it happily. If someone in that situation isn't given the opportunity to make that choice or have any input on the decision to be in that situation, and was not only lured there under false pretenses but also lied to throughout the entire relationship, well, that's just completely wrong, obviously. Nancy talks to Peggy about how monogamy just doesn't work for her, Dale, and John, but doesn't even consider the fact that her and John are the only ones who made that choice. Dale never consented to this, which, by default, makes it extremely unethical. Furthermore, isn't it still monogamy if she's exclusively romantic and only in love with John Redcorn? She doesn't even really interact with Dale even in a friend sense, let alone as a romantic partner. In all reality, she's just kind of made a promise to one man and been monogamous with the other behind the first guy's back. What it really comes down to, and I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, but Dale is way too good for Nancy. He may be a cigarette lung-hacking, gangly conspiracy theorist, but he's an honest man. He tells the truth, and he calls it like it is. What you see with Dale is what you get. And he's also the kind of man who doesn't like leaving things when he's wronged someone that he cares about. And that trait is one that I feel like a lot of people could learn from. In this episode, after he hit John Redcorn with that lamp in the middle of the night, he ended up going right over to his house the next day to apologize and make things better any way that he could. He went right over there because he felt awful about that one singular time that he accidentally wronged John Redcorn. Meanwhile, neither Nancy nor John have much regret for what they did to Dale for 14 years up to this point. I mean, it's pretty shocking to take in that Dale's sense of morals, as wild of a guy that he is, are more in check than both John and Nancy combined. Now, there's one other huge factor here that absolutely grinds my gears, and that would be the fact that since Dale has done John Redcorn a personal favor for his cause, now he's considered a friend. This right here, A, isn't very cool, as it implies that to John Redcorn, somebody is only his friend if they do something for him, and B, it circles right back to an earlier point made in the last episode. What has Hank ever done to John Redcorn to be considered a friend? In all reality, what happened here wasn't Dale meeting John's requirements and checking the boxes for what he considers a friend, so now his wife is off limits all of a sudden. John just kind of realized how messed up it is that he's sleeping with this man's wife, and even had a child with her, when, all the while, Dale has been nothing but good to John for more than a decade now. On a different John Redcorn related note though, I certainly have to point out the irony of Nancy calling John Redcorn to cancel her appointment, saying that she has a headache, and his answer being to take an aspirin. I don't mean to call the guy or his business into question. It worked for Peggy when she had headaches, right? However, seeing him in work has me realizing that he's just kind of a massage therapist more or less. If he was really able to heal headaches like he claims, wouldn't he suggest an actual headache treatment for Nancy instead of aspirin? Now, I guess that's not necessarily to call his methods of healing bogus or anything, but it is to emphasize just how much all of this truly is a cover-up for him banging married women. I mean, in the last episode, he even told Hank that he would never heal his wife the way that he heals the wives of others. Which, that statement in and of itself, I mean, he could only be talking about Nancy, but when Hank addresses her by name, and John Redcorn responds with wives in a plural sense, it really makes you wonder just how deep all of this goes with John Redcorn healing men's wives. As far as the rest of this episode goes, there are so many undertones and deeper meanings that I'm positive a lot of us overlooked, some a little more obvious than others. First of all, we have to acknowledge John Redcorn's silent heartbreak here. For 14 years, he's struggled in silence as the Bureau of Indian Affairs blows off his request for the remembrance of his people and the return of their stolen land. All the while, building a secret with a married woman. However, once that secret comes to an abrupt end, he's forced to let go and move on, and with a new breath of fresh air into an old cause for him, he's able to do so surprisingly gracefully. In all reality, Nancy doesn't break up with him due to guilt. It's because she falls back in love with Dale. If we're being honest, that is a massive blow. Not only the fact that John is losing the woman he's madly in love with, but he's losing her to Dale Gribble of all people. A man who's been written off as a clueless idiot by so many people, including John Redcorn. For over a decade, John was the man that Nancy came to for love. He was the one she turned to for intimacy both physically and emotionally. However, when that was all called into question and lit ablaze, when the smoke cleared, it wasn't guilt that ended the affair, it was love. Just not for him. And that right there is painful. It's a kind of pain that would continue to linger in silence. Perhaps most painful for him, and most shocking of all though, is the fact that Dale won Nancy back by just, well, being Dale. In all reality, this is one of Dale's most interesting episodes in the way that he won her love unknowingly and seemingly by accident. I mean, he doesn't really change. He doesn't discover the affair. He just has an opportunity to treat Nancy with the same overconfident affection that he always has. And as a result, this blind sincerity reminds Nancy of why she fell in love with Dale to begin with. Dale, in all reality, never had to fight for Nancy. He didn't even know that he needed to. He had no idea that he was throwing his hat in the ring in a sense. Somehow, though, his clueless devotion would end up holding more power than John's years of intimacy. And that right there, in a way, kind of makes Dale unbeatable. Like, you can't outplay a guy who wins not even knowing that he's in a game. However, what makes this so much more complex and layered is the remarkable and unexpected bond that formed between Dale and John. Even more remarkable than that, though, is the way that Nancy making the decision to leave this affair behind is almost painted as growth and the beginning of a redemption arc of sorts. But like, at the core of that decision, it is pretty much rooted only in self-preservation. She doesn't really come clean or take accountability for the years of betrayal. She just slips back into monogamy with her husband like nothing happened. In all honesty, the show never really showing her consequences really does say a lot. There wasn't even an apology to Dale, just to John Redcorn. And the audience? Well, we're left with nothing but this quiet sense of resignation. Like, at a glance, this was almost a happy ending. The Gribble family stays together. John Redcorn finds purpose in an old cause brought back to life. But when we really zoom out, this is a story about a man who's unknowingly raising someone else's child, a woman who never really has to see any consequence for her betrayal, and a father who has no choice but to watch his son grow up from the sidelines. And at the end of it all, there isn't an explosive reveal or a big confrontation, just a quiet and subtle end to more than a decade of betrayal. And that's what makes this show so special. That right there isn't a punchline. This is a tragedy with a laugh track that was pulled off so incredibly well. So that was it. The affair was over with no big reveal, just the quiet and uneasy return to what always was. Nancy went back to Dale, who of course has always welcomed her with open arms. Meanwhile, John Redcorn walked away with nothing but the weight of every year that he had lost along the way. Even with the affair behind them, though, not everybody was free. There was still one major lingering question that nobody really asked. What about Joseph? This little boy at this point is the only thread that strings them together. He's the only living proof of everything left unsaid. Of course, that question could only remain unasked for so long, and eventually, that thread was bound to unravel. The next episode we're going to check out is one that finally turns its attention to the boy unknowingly at the center of this whirlwind of a silent storm. We're looking at none other than the Season 5 episode, Spin the Choice. This episode takes place in the days leading up to Thanksgiving. As Hank and Bobby sit at the table, Hank takes a moment to ceremoniously pass the family turkey knife to him, giving him the option to carve one of their family turkeys this year if he chooses to.
Pretend it's Thanksgiving and this bread is a turkey. Oh my God, it's so juicy!
Yo!
You see, Bobby, on Thanksgiving, people will be so jazzed by the moistness of the turkey you'll have to tune them out. Now try again.
From there, we see John Redcorn's Jeep parked outside of the Gribble house, but instead of coming to visit Nancy, he's there to see Dale as they talk about the legal case that Dale's still helping him work on to get his tribe's land returned. He's got really high hopes as he's recently learned about the government returning 84,000 acres to a different tribe, thinking that'll set a solid precedent for them to stand on. Just then, Joseph walks in, greeting his father and ignoring John Redcorn.
Joseph, hello. Hey. So, is that a new backpack? Looks good on you.
John offers Joseph a ride to school because he's going to be speaking to his class about the Native Americans' role in Thanksgiving. However, Joseph declines, saying that he'd rather ride his bike. At that, he asks Dale for help, saying that his bike chain is busted. As the two leave, Nancy walks into the living room, greeting John Redcorn platonically. He begins sharing his hurt feelings about how Joseph is growing so quickly and how he's really thankful for the holidays because so much time goes by without John getting to see him.
Thank God for the holidays.
Yeah, about that. I just don't think it's a good idea you're coming by this Thanksgiving.
But I barely see my son since we broke up.
Shug, he's Dale's son, remember?
See that now. But when it comes time to get him into college, let's see what box you check.
We cut to that day at school where John Redcorn is talking to Bobby and Joseph's class about how his people used to own what is now central and southern Texas, but the white man came and took it from them. Sadly, Joseph, the one kid that he genuinely is really hoping will take notice and care about the cause, has absolutely no interest. But Bobby, on the other hand, is completely taken back, saying that he had no idea that he came from a heritage of people who did such awful things. Seeing Bobby's genuine interest as an opportunity to get closer to Joseph, He offers Bobby and Joseph a ride home, which Bobby happily accepts. However, after 2.5 hours of waiting around for school to get out, John is left frustrated when Joseph doesn't even take him up on the offer.
And I really appreciate that, especially after all you say the white man did to the Indians.
You don't know the half of it. The white man is still doing it.
As Bobby learns about the history of how Native Americans have been wronged by the white man at his house, Peggy learns the shocking news that nobody likes her yearly Thanksgiving Boggle tournament, leading her to decide that she's going to invent a new game for them all to play. One that will blow Boggle out of the water. One that features two things that people love the most in game shows: spinning and choosing.
What do I get to choose? Some shows have you choose a category. My God, wake me up when it's over. In my game, you take that choice and you spin it. The name of the game is Spin the Choice.
While Peggy and Luann hammer out the fine details of her new game, Bobby gets dropped off by John Redcorn. As he walks up the driveway, Hank talks to him about carving his turkey some more, but Bobby isn't having any of it, saying that murdering and eating an animal is no way to commemorate 350 years of Native Americans being attacked and forced off of their land.
You and your white people stole hundreds of thousands of acres from John Redcorn, and now you celebrate by frying a turkey? When does the killing end?
What the?
Hank, you're terrible.
I am not.
Just give him his land back, Hank.
Hank goes to talk to his son, but when he assumes that all of this is just him being nervous about carving the turkey, Bobby is disgusted at that accusation. He hands his dad the turkey knife, saying that he refuses to carve his turkey that's basted in the blood of the innocent, walking out of the room in shame of being white. From there, Bobby ends up going all out, putting a ton of work into genuinely planning a traditional Native American protest feast. Meanwhile, John Redcorn is still struggling with how he can connect with Joseph. As he drives home, he ends up passing Joseph, who's riding his bike on his way home from school, and he stops to talk with him. John ends up gifting Joseph a traditional handmade Native American headdress, but Joseph just calls it some horns and a feather, offering a half-hearted thanks in return. Absolutely leaving John devastated on both a deep cultural and a fatherly level. Right at that moment, Hank walks up to John's car door, knocking on it before letting himself in, wondering what he's telling Bobby to make him accuse his own father of such awful things. However, it becomes apparent pretty quickly to Hank that this isn't really about the ancestral history of the Native Americans being wronged by the white man.
He's the spirit of our people.
Bobby is?
Joseph.
Oh.
Hank. I want my son back.
John Redcorn sobs in his Jeep as Hank runs away in discomfort over the whole situation. Just like that, though, we fast forward to the evening of the Hills Thanksgiving celebration. They have the whole neighborhood gathered as Bobby embarrasses Hank with his own anti-Thanksgiving celebration. However, Peggy stands up for Bobby, embracing his sense of teenage rebellion. A while later, though, much to Nancy's dismay, John Redcorn shows up carrying a dish, clearly ready to celebrate. She immediately rushes up to Hank and asks him to kick John out, worrying that he might do something stupid. Surprisingly, Hank agrees, and when he asks John what he's doing here, he says that Bobby invited him there.
Bobby? He's just a minor. He doesn't have the authority to...
Is this because of what happened in the car the other day?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I was crying, and you felt a little uncomfortable with...
Well, I know you're here to see Bobby, so I won't keep you.
John sits down and asks Bobby about what he's been up to, but before Bobby can even get a word out, John is walking away trying to go see Joseph. He's intercepted, though, by Nancy, who full-blown confronts him, telling him that he shouldn't be here. As the two are talking, though, they're interrupted by Dale, who comes bearing some news for John.
You got a settlement offer from the government. 12 delicious acres of unincorporated Arlen.
12? I was seeking 130,000. There's no way I'm accepting this insult.
Dale tries to look at the bright side, convincing him of why he should be thankful, saying that at least 11 of the acres are connected to each other. He then makes a toast so that everybody can celebrate John Redcorn getting 1/1000th of his land sought. At that, feeling overwhelmed with anguish over the fact that he feels like Joseph hates him, John Redcorn makes his own toast.
To the white man who steals our land and steals our sons.
To the white man!
To the white man?
In an effort to maybe relieve a bit of the tension, Hank invites Bobby to say something nice about the Native Americans, and he's absolutely stoked to get to read a speech that he prepared about how much John Redcorn has taught him about the history of his people. Unfortunately, though, things take a dark turn when Bobby starts bringing up books that he read in the library talking about a tribe in the region who celebrated their most festive occasions by eating the body of their enemies in a cannibalistic ritual. He says that they're celebrating the, quote, Native American People Eater by dining upon this head that he prepared especially for John Redcorn.
Oh, man. You eat people?
Joseph, don't listen to him. That was over 700 years ago.
Get your hands off me, you cannibal freak!
We fast forward to later that day where yet again Dale is arriving at John's trailer, hoping to make everything better if he can. He walks up to the sound of destruction and smashing glass as John opens the door looking like he could rip a phone book in half. Dale says that he's really sorry that his son has all the Gribble passion with none of the Gribble charm. At that, though, John tells Dale to sit down so that he can talk to him about that.
14 years ago, I was gassing up my Jeep and I met...
Do I still need to use an ashtray?
He tries his best to explain, but he just can't seem to find a way to get the words out. Torn between not wanting to hurt Dale and feeling frustrated that he's dug himself into this hole that he's now stuck in. Meanwhile, back at the Thanksgiving celebration, everyone is playing Spin the Choice, which seems to make absolutely no sense whatsoever. As they play, though, Nancy takes a moment to talk to Joseph about John and what happened.
John Redcorn is a good man who's lost everything important to him.
Yeah, stupid land. Get over it already.
Joseph John Gribble, you should be ashamed of yourself. What if your father lost the places he hunted and fished and lived and loved?
Nancy realizes that it's her fault that Joseph doesn't respect or even understand anything about John Redcorn's heritage, as she takes him aside to have a talk that she says she should have had with him a long time ago. Along the way, though, Hank ends up getting a phone call from Dale, who's hiding in John Redcorn's bathroom, saying that he's been kidnapped and that he's afraid he's going to be eaten, terrified by how much research John has done to prove that his people haven't practiced cannibalism in over 700 years.
Has he told you anything?
He's playing it very coy. You have to save me, Hank. Now here's the plan.
Dale, you're just going psst, psst, psst.
Well, I've got nothing!
As Hank announces that he's going to John Redcorn's house to calm Dale down, Joseph says that he wants to come with, as does Bobby. On the ride there, Hank and his son have a conversation about how problematic it was for Bobby to hyperfixate on an aspect of their heritage that's considered taboo and was left behind centuries ago for a reason. Bobby tries to argue with him, but ultimately Hank gets him to realize that he essentially painted John Redcorn and his entire heritage as something that they aren't, and that it really did some damage. By the end of the conversation, though, Bobby ends up seeing the error of his ways, and as the dominoes fall, he decides that he is going to carve a turkey after all. Next thing you know, though, the group is arriving at John's trailer.
What did you say to Dale?
Nothing. Yet. I can't believe she left me. For that.
She didn't leave you for that. She married that 2 years before she met you.
As John realizes that Joseph is here, he decides that it's time that he tell both him and Dale the truth. However, before he can, Joseph approaches him, giving him a heartfelt and touching apology, and telling him about how his mom sat him down and talked to him about everything. She told him about how hundreds of years ago the white man stole his heritage and land, and that he deserves to have it back. More importantly, she told Joseph that they're all children of the earth, so in a way, him and John Redcorn are related.
So what did you want to tell us, Kimo-sabe?
I think I will take those 12 acres after all. And then, upon my death, I would like to pass the land on to you, Dale, for all the help you've given me.
Score!
John stresses how much he would love for Joseph to live on his forefather's land after Dale passes, and just like that, as the episode comes to an end, we see John Redcorn standing with Hank, showing him the land that he was able to reclaim, which unfortunately is right next to a very busy and super loud highway. But nevertheless, they all make the best of it as we zoom out to see that everybody is gathered to have a meal celebrating John Redcorn's victory. Right out the gate, it needs to be pointed out that this one is such an important episode, and it's one that, though it has its humorous bits, it's deeply rooted in emotional and cultural tension colliding with one another like a freight train playing chicken with an 18-wheeler. One of the biggest aspects of this episode that really stresses that more than anything is John Redcorn's open vulnerability. I mean, you have to admit that it was jarring and heartbreaking to see a typically stoic and reserved man like John Redcorn break down and sob his eyes out in front of Hank, saying that he wants his son back so badly. I mean, first of all, this entire episode speaks volumes to his emotional awareness as a man. It honestly takes a strong man to be able to cry in front of other people, especially in an area like southern Texas in the 90s. Furthermore, the pain in his voice when he shares his strife and how badly he wants Joseph back really just tugs at the heartstrings, especially when we consider that this statement alone comes with the implication that he even had Joseph to begin with. And, well, we all know that the only involvement that John has had with Joseph up to this point has been from an awkward distance as he sleeps with his mother, only being around through forced interactions and that brief and unavoidable moment that they likely pass each other in the hallway. This is pretty much the only time that we see John Redcorn break down openly in front of anyone, and admitting that he wants Joseph back. It's his rawest moment if we're being honest. The salt on the wound, though, the fact that Joseph ends up essentially hurling a cannibalism slur at his own biological father. This right here was just devastating. John already feels like Joseph doesn't know him at all. He can barely get Joseph to talk to him, so he has no idea how Joseph really feels about him. But when the time comes that he finally gets a bit of honesty from Joseph, it's just a massive wall of fear-based hostility. This entire moment really does a phenomenal job of emphasizing the already massive disconnect that he has from the child that he biologically fathered. The tipping point that made this specific episode reach its climax, though, sadly enough, it would be Bobby, the one kid in class who seemed to actually take any interest in what John Redcorn talked to his class about. The only student that took what happened to the Native Americans at the hands of his ancestors seriously. His protest, of course, meant as satire, and to go against the grain as far as traditional Thanksgiving goes, ends up becoming a weapon in a way. One that Bobby doesn't even really realize that he's wielding. One that exposed ignorance and allowed John Redcorn's teachings to be warped into an unintentional mockery. This right here represents wholeheartedly how trivializing heritage has massive consequences and can really destroy people. Of course, it does need to be noted that Bobby had nothing but good intentions from the start, being the only one who took into consideration that someone needs to finally take some accountability for how deeply wrong the Native Americans were by colonizers. Deeper than that, too, it needs to be noted that, sure, John Redcorn was offended and upset by this accusation and essential embracing of cannibalism on Bobby's behalf. But his biggest feelings that fueled the reaction that he had were anger and hurt, festering inside of him as a result of Dale raising his son, leaving Joseph blissfully unaware of his true heritage, and how really important that it is. John Redcorn wasn't necessarily mad at Bobby because he knows that his heart is in the right place, and that he's just not the most socially aware. However, what really stung for him at this moment wasn't the fact that Bobby did what he did. It was the fact that this happened in front of Joseph of all people, and that it got such a massive response from him. It's one of those where all he can do is sit by and feel a deep internal struggle surrounding the choices that he's made, because in all reality, he can't be mad at Joseph. He can't be mad at Bobby or Dale. They didn't do anything, and, well, as a matter of fact, they're completely oblivious to the complexities of this entire situation because they're so in the dark as to the decisions that he's made and the lies that he's told to get to the point where he's at emotionally. Of anybody, I'd say that he does have a bit of a right at the minimum to be offended and frustrated with Nancy. She helped make the bed that they both laid in. She lied just as much as John did, if not maybe more. However, here she is insisting that John Redcorn not come to the annual Thanksgiving celebration with everybody that he usually celebrates with. Just for her comfort? Because she's worried that he's gonna pull something and expose her lie? Like, it's really icky when you consider that we've never seen him involved with any family or anybody outside of our immediate circle of characters here. Plus, he was full-blown invited here by Bobby, and Hank didn't have a single problem with it until she spoke up. I mean, Thanksgiving, though it is originally rooted in a very questionable and honestly sad truth, it is, in a modern sense, focused around togetherness and being with people who care about you. And Nancy, a white woman asking the only Native American person that she knows not to come to Hank's celebration on account of her own feelings? Like, I get that they're ex-lovers, but A, Joseph is his biological son, and that's a fact that Nancy can never change. And B, he's more than just her ex. He's a part of this community that they've all collectively built, and that's even further emphasized by everybody gathering on his land in the end. The fact that she would want to ostracize John Redcorn and bury this lie further to his detriment is just really selfish and sad. Like, it's not even about protecting Dale or Joseph at this point. It's about her covering herself to avoid having her secret exposed. Their relationship is a chapter of her life that she considers closed at this point, and she'll do everything she can to keep it hidden from Dale and Joseph, even if that means emotionally destroying John in the process. Now, one thing I will admit that I'm actually very curious about was that moment where Hank approaches John Redcorn at the request of Nancy with the intention of asking him to leave. When Hank calls him being there into question, John immediately reacts by asking him if this is about their interaction in the car when he was crying in front of Hank and made him uncomfortable. Which, of course, just him bringing that up makes Hank uncomfortable yet again, causing him to back down and run away with his tail between his legs. Now this one, at face value, comes across as an expression of John's emotional awareness and him being comfortable with owning up to his feelings. However, as true as that is, I'm wondering if there's a chance that John could have brought that up, specifically knowing that it would make Hank uncomfortable and run away like he did before. I mean, power to him if that is the case. Like, that's a huge benefit of having that kind of strength for sure. However, I will admit, this really does make me want to do a deep dive into Hank and his tendency to completely run away from any and all emotionally driven scenarios and where that tendency comes from. Because, boy, would that make a massive juicy video. As far as this one goes, one last thing I want to bring up before we move on to the next episode is just how important that talk between Nancy and her son was on a human level. If we're being truly honest, regardless of the context behind Joseph's conception, it's heartbreaking knowing that this boy has Native American blood flowing through his veins, yet here he was brazenly dismissing the importance of their culture and not recognizing why they deserve respect just as much as anyone else does. Here he is, basically mocking John Redcorn for wanting his land and his people's stolen heritage back, completely unaware that the heritage and land that he's mocking is really his own. It really is just such a defeating scenario, and that's what I'm talking about when I said earlier that the show doesn't just allow John Redcorn to be the by default home-wrecking bad guy. He's a man with deep feelings and a genuinely valid reason to be upset with a world that has wronged his entire ancestry so harshly. On top of everything else, we have to acknowledge the fact that this episode hits so hard because, considering the root of the topic at hand, this isn't a trivial scenario where oh, Dale's just some guy with roots from California, but Joseph's secret biological father has a deep, rich Brooklyn history, or something like that. No, making it pointless like that would make the entire scenario too cartoony, and again, this show doesn't lean into cartoon logic for even a second. The fact that Joseph's true origins lie within Native American descent really makes the nuances here so much more complex and hard to dissect because, we're talking about a race of people who were literally subject to an attempted genocide. We're talking about an entire culture that's been attempted to be erased from history. Joseph's heritage is really, really important. Him knowing where he comes from is culturally imperative as a matter of fact, but he can't know. He's been dragged so deep into this situation that odds are he might never know the truth unless he figures it out himself, because a revelation like that from someone you've trusted your entire life could cause some serious trauma. And a lot of people around him know that. Growing up under the impression that someone is your biological parent just to find out later in life that you were never related to that person by blood, that kind of messes you up in a way. It's not something that I've experienced firsthand, but someone very near and dear to me has, and it's truly shocking just how many waves that can make in someone's life. I mean, of course, it doesn't erase the years of history with the person that you've called mom or dad, and that person is still your parent as the one that cared for you and raised you. But with that being said, two things can be true at once. You can be shocked at the revelation that someone isn't biologically your parent, even traumatized by it, and still love that person as a parent. Ultimately, though, this one shows just how deeply John Redcorn is aching for Joseph to know the truth. And that right there is clear as day. You don't need me to tell you that. However, it is easy to overlook just how depressing the undertone of John's acceptance at the end is. Sure, he ends up seeming happy and okay with how things turned out, but along the way, he was aching for this validation from his son so badly that he was simply willing to accept Nancy's gesture of telling Joseph that they're related from both being children of the earth. I mean, after everything, after how rude she was in trying to exclude John from this yearly gathering that he was invited to, knowing how much he's genuinely aching from the distance with his biological son. And he's still willing to accept Joseph not knowing the truth, as long as he at least gets some reassurance that at bare minimum, Joseph respects his heritage, whether he knows he shares that heritage with John or not. It's really sad that after everything, it always just ends up in things continuing business as usual. Sure, the affair may have stopped, but the lies that it had produced still linger with the scent of shame. But ultimately, the tough part of this is that this could be seen as a karmic balance. I mean, he is the one who slept with a married man's wife. However, it's frustrating that while John is left to suffer the consequences and struggle by himself, Nancy gets to continue her life, free of nearly any consequences. She doesn't have to be alone. She doesn't have a heritage to protect that was under attack for hundreds of years. The continuation of Nancy's entire heritage isn't dependent on Joseph. Whereas for John Redcorn, the same can't be said. Familial legacy and passing the torch down is something that genuinely is really important to him. And to be honest, it would make me really happy to see John Redcorn having a family in the new King of the Hill. I would love it if he had another child that he could actually call a son to his face with someone who's actually good for him and not married. It would be amazing to see the Redcorn name live on. One truly devastating aspect, though, especially for those that crave a sense of justice, is the fact that the truth just never seems to come out. We fly close to the sun a few times, but ultimately it never happens in the end. At least, not any truth that's in favor of John Redcorn. Never one that helps his cause or eases a bit of his pain. He's always just left to carry the burden of a lonesome life while Nancy just kind of gets to move on. But as the door closes on Spin the Choice, another one would open. One that would come with a revelation that will change absolutely everything about how you see the last 3 episodes that we've analyzed. This would come in the form of none other than the season 12 episode, Untitled Blake McCormick Project. Now, at this point in the video, before I get into this episode, I really want to clarify something that we haven't covered yet that you're gonna need to know when approaching this one. Along the journey of this show, there's an episode where Dale starts having suspicions about Joseph, and ultimately he comes to the conclusion that Nancy was abducted by aliens and impregnated. It's an excellent episode, and actually, it's one that I'm planning on covering in part 2 of this video. Only if you guys want it though. I've got it mapped out to continue this story and actually cover even more episodes than I did in this one. But I have to admit, even this video alone was a massive undertaking. I have poured a lot into this one for an offensively long period of time. With that being said, let me know if you all even want a part 2 by dropping a like and telling me down in the comments. That'll help me gauge interest and decide if I'm actually gonna commit to that video. This episode, though, starts out with Hank and his friends at the hardware store as Bill tells them that he has a date with a woman tonight who one of the sergeants at the army base set him up with, saying that he's perfect for her. Just then, out of nowhere, they see John Redcorn walking out of the employees only area.
John Redcorn doesn't work here.
Oh, he works here all right. If by work here you mean having casual sex.
Later that evening, Bill ends up dressed his best at That's Amore, the same romantic restaurant from a few episodes ago. His date arrives and his jaw nearly hits the floor when he sees a seemingly normal, beautiful woman here to meet him. The two end up hitting it off famously. Bill learns that Charlene used to live in Arlen 20 years ago but recently came back. More than anything, however, he's delighted to learn that Charlene is a mom. It isn't long before she's pulling up to the alley and into Hank's driveway, asking for help finding Bill's house.
Bill's place is just across the alley, so you must be Charlene.
Yes, and these are my kids, Kate and Drew.
Wow, what a beautiful lawn. It looks just like a golf course.
Well, thank you, Kate.
Immediately, Dale is intrigued with Kate, leaning forward to meet her eyes and get a better look, leaving her a little bit confused. Later in the alley, Hank is reflecting on how nice Charlene and her kids seemed, but Dale says that he doesn't really like Kate.
Something is severely unright with that child.
Dale, those kids were perfectly fine.
Hank, you'd cozy up to Mussolini if he liked your lawn. That girl is not one of us, and I intend to prove it.
Dale says that his gut is telling him that Kate has to be some sort of pod person or a robot or something like that. But Hank shuts him down immediately, saying that he's being crazy and that he needs to be supportive for Bill. Unfortunately, though, his intrigue gets the best of him and he defies Hank's demands, luring Kate into a game of who can pluck the longest hair from their head.
Ow! Hey!
You're the winner! Oh.
I didn't get a turn.
Dale ends up having Kate's DNA tested at a testing facility, and as he's doing it, Hank and Peggy are at Bill's house for a rather awkward gathering of families. As Hank sits on the couch with Bill, though, shortly after he ends up seeing Dale waving for his attention outside. Hank goes to meet him, and he's floored when Dale drops a massive bomb on him, showing that her DNA matches precisely one half that of Joseph, specifically showing them to have the same father.
As you may recall, I learned some time ago that Joseph was conceived while I was away from Nancy, an anomaly that can only be explained by alien gene traders covertly planting my DNA into my sleeping wife.
Right.
Dale suggests that after the aliens impregnated Nancy, they decided to use his DNA on Charlene as well, with plans to build a master race, using Dale as the foundation. Though he understands why they would want his peak alpha male human DNA, he's puzzled as to just why they'd want to do it in the first place. Hank tells him that aliens are unpredictable and that he should do absolutely nothing with this information. And at that, Hank goes home and ends up spilling the tea to Peggy, who's just completely dumbfounded to find out that all along, while Nancy was cheating on Dale, John Redcorn was cheating on Nancy. She immediately goes to spread the hot goss, picking up the phone, but she quickly realizes that there isn't a single soul that they can tell about this revelation.
We can't tell anyone.
Yep. There's not a thing we can do.
Peggy sees Bobby in the kitchen as she literally forces him outside to get in between Joseph and Kate, who at this point are getting uncomfortably close with one another. Thankfully, he's able to separate the two as Dale goes on a deep investigation to get to the bottom of this. Eventually, he ends up asking Nancy if she has any memories about the night that she was abducted by aliens and impregnated. She starts getting concerned with his questions, of course, wondering why he would be prying into that night, and Dale reveals that he did a DNA test on Kate and learned that she and Joseph share the same identical paternal DNA.
I'm sorry, did you say Joseph and this girl have the same father?
Not only that, but they were born just a few days apart. Yep, I guess you and Charlene were visited by the same aliens. In the same week. Maybe the same day.
Nancy ends up having John Redcorn over that night as he stands his ground, saying that he's never even met a Charlene. As they have this conversation, though, Dale walks in out of nowhere, having returned from work, chiming in almost excited about the fact that he's stumbled upon this massive mystery. John Redcorn, though, argues, saying that the DNA test must be incorrect.
Dale never cheated on you.
Never? John Redcorn?
I'm not sure why John Redcorn would have that information, but no,
Okay, maybe there were isolated incidents, but Dale always took precautions.
Things get even further and further emotional as Dale is just oblivious to the real context behind this heated conversation, deciding that he's just gonna follow Hank's advice and do absolutely nothing, walking off happily. As the episode progresses, Bill announces to his friends that Charlene is moving in, and his friends are all happy for him, except for Dale, who is taken back and saying that he is not going to accept this.
Bill Dauterive will not raise my daughter.
If you have some idea of what we should be doing, I'm listening. All right, then.
Bill throws a party to celebrate, and the whole neighborhood gathers, enjoying each other's company. Meanwhile, Dale ends up stumbling upon John Redcorn hiding behind a bush across the street. Dale assumes that he's there for some cool Native American reason, but John tells him he actually wanted to see Joseph's sister and her mother.
That's Charlene.
Candy?
Sorry, I don't have any. You know, the mothers of my children are pretty hot. The aliens seem partial to pouty lips and an ample bosom.
Yes, they do.
At that, Dale ends up concocting a plan to have John Redcorn seduce Charlene so that she will leave Bill. John questions Dale's morals for a moment, wondering why he'd want to do that to his own friend. But when Dale tells him that he doesn't want an idiot raising his daughter, John Redcorn is able to relate, which causes him to agree, even though he clearly realizes that this is a very messed up thing to do. Next thing you know, though, we see Bill and Charlene shopping at the grocery store when Dale lies to Bill about dropping his keys in the freezer and needing help, leaving Charlene all alone.
John Redcorn.
Hello, Candy. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. I haven't gone by my stage name in years. It's Charlene now.
Your name may have changed, but your incredible beauty has not.
A while later, we see Bill in the alley telling the guys about how he's been getting a ton of quality time with the kids since Charlene hooked back up with her old girlfriends. All the while, Dale is laughing to himself when Bill explains that they've kept her out late every night this week. From there, we see Bill's life devolve into essentially the one that Dale used to live, spending his days and nights alone while John Redcorn courts his girlfriend, openly kissing her while dropping her off like there's nothing to hide and hopping out the window the second that Bill pulls into the driveway.
Was that John Redcorn?
I know. How long does it take to steal a woman from Bill? I've recruited John Redcorn to seduce Charlene. Soon my daughter will be back in the healthy embrace of a single-parent family.
Hank gets absolutely pissed off at Dale and drags him right over to Bill, who's in the middle of hang-drying the kids' laundry. Dale ends up being forced to tell Bill the truth as he sees it, and he lays it all out, even down to the last detail of how Kate and Joseph are both actually his kids that were conceived by alien abductions, and the extent of John Redcorn's involvement in breaking Bill and Charlene up. Bill thinks about it for a while, connecting the dots and meeting eyes with Hank, who's clearly just filled with shame.
Charlene and John Redcorn, huh? They seem like a good couple.
So you're not filled with rage?
Actually, I feel okay. I don't think I'm cut out for parenthood. Actually, I hate kids. I mean, not all kids, but just the ones that are around all the time.
Bill tries to look at the bright side, saying that he had a woman stolen from him by John Redcorn, and that's kind of an honor in his opinion. From there, though, Charlene ends up moving out of Bill's house and into John Redcorn's trailer, leaving Joseph pretty heartbroken because he felt like Kate was his other half. Meanwhile, Dale is just thankful that Bill won't be raising Kate.
Sure was nice of Redcorn to agree to raise my child for me. Can't say I'd do the same.
The camera zooms out on everyone in the neighborhood, and just like that, this episode comes to an end. Oh man. First of all, this one is such an underrated gem of an episode, and it genuinely does such a great job of portraying the ripple effect of so many different things going on here. It's such a layered and complex episode on so many different levels. One of the biggest things that caught my attention, though, is the way that Dale's delusions have stretched so far by this point that it's almost impressive. Like, it's not just that Dale doesn't know that Joseph isn't his biological son. It's that he's built an entire narrative and worldview that protects him from ever having to know the truth. When it comes to the point that a massive revelation like Joseph having a half-sister comes out, it doesn't even make Dale question things for a second. He doesn't think to examine his own connections to Joseph's biology. Instead, he just rewrites the entire story so that the only conclusion is him being Kate's father as well. In all reality, he's essentially priming himself to associate anybody with John Redcorn's DNA with aliens. I mean, ask the right harebrained conspiracy theorist in real life, and I'm sure they'll tell you that his ancestors had some close ties to extraterrestrials. But the sad reality here is that this poor guy has no idea that what he thinks are his alien-made children are just the result of John Redcorn sowing his wild oats in his 20s. It's one of those where you know good and well that this is genuinely what Dale believes, as he himself is a major conspiracy theorist. However, it definitely needs to be noted that this is kind of a solid metaphor for extreme denial as a coping mechanism. Sometimes that need to draw yourself a picture, which, as illogical as it may possibly be, explains everything in a way that allows you to avoid the truth, but in doing so, you can be left with a distorted sense of reality in exchange for maintaining your pride. On top of that, it's kind of a metaphor for how that same kind of extreme denial can create a warped sense of parental duty. We saw that in full force when Dale took it upon himself to make decisions about who should be raising Kate. A kid who, even if she was biologically his, he has nothing to do with, and as such, shouldn't be making any decisions about her life and who raises her. However, since he's painted this picture where he thinks that's his daughter, he thinks he has the right to stir other people's pot in the name of making parental decisions for them. On that note, we have to talk about the messed up irony in Dale drawing the line at Charlene moving in because he refuses to have Bill raising his child. If that's the line and where it's okay to draw it, you'd think John Redcorn would have had his blessings to pipe up about it a long time ago, right? Of course, it's not that easy though. Furthermore, I don't want to point fingers and toss around a negative narrative of real-life comparisons, but Dale strikes me as one of those guys who would take the stance that it would be okay for him to draw that line with Bill. However, he certainly wouldn't have been okay if John Redcorn had drawn that line with him. It honestly really shows Dale's sometimes hypocritical colors bright as day. Speaking of hypocrites though, we certainly have to talk about John Redcorn. There's so much wrong here on his behalf. The fact that he's still dying on this hill of lying to Nancy about his cheating, even though there is full-blown living proof. Just like there's living proof of her cheating on Dale. John Redcorn paints himself out to be this noble guy who has his morals rooted in spiritual guidance. But we have to recognize that at the same time, he's not afraid to lie if that means covering his tracks, avoiding accountability, and getting what he wants. Now, of course, one of the most morally grotesque aspects of this episode is Dale's decision to deliberately use John Redcorn to destroy Bill's relationship. The very thing that at one time left his own relationship a shell of its former self. It's just so ironic that Dale would unconsciously shove this same exact situation that he unknowingly went through onto Bill. It's a tough one where this kind of implies a massive psychological crack in Dale rather than just surface level ignorance. It's almost painting a picture of internalized betrayal that leads to him manipulating John Redcorn and ultimately using him as a means to an end for a situation that he doesn't even know the level of which he's involved in. However, given the fact that Dale doesn't even know the truth whatsoever, it really just boils down to Dale truly being a bad friend to Bill, and the level of which that he displays that in this episode is just deplorable if we're being honest. The fact that Dale would ruin the first positive relationship that Bill has had in ages And the fact that he's just unknowingly signing Bill up for the same life that he himself once lived through is just such a subtle poetic chain of events to take in. It's a disturbing stab in the back, and honestly, it kind of makes you feel less bad about everybody not telling Dale about Nancy cheating on him. Because, well, he's kind of a douchebag sometimes. In all reality, this boils down to Bill being a mirror of Dale's past, more or less. He plays the role of other man raising someone else's child unknowingly caught in a web of romantic lies. The fact that Dale, of all people, is the reason why he's in that position would be the big key factor that really does lessen our empathy for Dale a bit. Going in just a bit of a different direction though, one aspect that I feel like is often overlooked is the weight behind John Redcorn's reluctance to help Dale at first. I mean, sure, he did end up going along with it even though he clearly had mixed feelings about doing this to Bill, but the roller coaster certainly was a reflection of his own complicated guilt. This right here was one of those rare moments where John Redcorn is placed in a position where he has no choice but to reckon with the legacy of his past decisions. Of course, it's subtle, but the weight of what he's done to Dale is certainly reflected in what he was about to do to Bill. It seems as if for a moment, John doesn't want to be that guy anymore. But Dale asks him to be, and at the temptation of lust, he can't pass up on the opportunity. As the dominoes fall, this is a very clear-cut representation of how people, such as John Redcorn, can get locked into roles that they've played at one point or another, even if they've outgrown them or no longer want them. Now, if there's anything else that I want to bring up in closing as it pertains to this particular episode, it would be the fact that Charlene and her kids are never brought up whatsoever after this one. It's honestly a little frustrating because this was an excellent opportunity for John Redcorn to become the family man that he's always wanted to be and raise a child aware of the importance of their heritage. However, they completely dropped the ball. John Redcorn would even be seen multiple times after this episode. However, we would never really follow up on the whole Charlene side of things. And, well, based on the intro for the reboot, it seems like maybe John Redcorn is back with Nancy again? Maybe? We'll just have to see. But the fact that they didn't keep this story arc going really does contradict the solid sense of continuity that they did a really excellent job of building throughout this entire series. I mean, there's just so much potential down the drain here. This was supposed to be a second chance for John Redcorn in a sense. I mean, this man's been yearning for emotional validation for over a decade that he's never really gotten from Joseph. In a way, this was kind of his chance for a do-over. A child that he could mold, protect, and raise without any doubts. But the tough part is, the whole foundation of it all is built upon lies, which can have a tendency to fall like a house of cards. In the quiet town of Arlen, Texas, denial is much louder than truth. That's the thread that's been quietly unraveling beneath John Redcorn's entire story arc from start to finish. Beneath the affair, the shame, the guilt, the heartbreak, is a man burdened by the consequences of nothing but his own actions. He's not alone though, as everyone else standing by and watching are all in a sense entangled in this web of secrets that none of them are brave enough to even attempt to untangle. What truly makes this particular story in King of the Hill so devastating though is the fact that no one here is cartoonishly evil. There's no villains plotting against everyone, just flawed people trying to protect themselves from a shameful reality. And honestly, maybe that's the cruelest part. John Redcorn is a man who was never allowed to be a father. Nancy is a woman who gave up stability for love. then gave up that love for survival. Dale? Well, Dale is a man who wears his ignorance like a vest of bulletproof armor. And Joseph is just a kid born into a story that no one will tell him. And this right here wasn't a subplot in any sense of the word. This was generational heartbreak camouflaged as background noise. And possibly the most mind-blowing of all is that it all happens in the margins. In the polite silences, in the way that not a single person here actually says what they truly mean. King of the Hill doesn't really spell it out or scream it from the rooftops. It doesn't really have to. It leaves mostly subtle context and awkward looks that lets you hear exactly what no one is saying. And that might just be one of the biggest aspects that makes this show just hit so hard. But what do you guys think? Did this video change the way that you perceive John Redcorn and his entire story arc? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Of course, I need to give a massive shout out with so much love, admiration, respect, and appreciation for my friends in the True 90s Kids tier on both Patreon and YouTube memberships. I can't stress enough how much every single one of my members and patrons are genuinely life-changing for me, and I feel so thankful to have so much support from such an amazing community. If you guys enjoyed this video, please drop a like and stick around for another nostalgic walk down memory lane. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Peace.
Peggy Hill.